I'd like to welcome everybody to APCUG's Wednesday workshops. We've got another fine one, we think, at least Orv and I think we do. This is a Learning Linux number 8. I'm pleased to have Orv here with us as a co-presenter. Judy Tallur is with us in charge of the chat box and questions, and Bill James is our co-host with taking care of any kind of the problems that you have. As we do our normal Wednesday workshops, we will have mics muted during the presentation part. If you have questions for the presenters, you will click the little drop-down arrow in your chat box and select Judy Tallur to send the question. And she has said in the little email that she sent out to make it easy, if it's a question for Orv, put a little O dash in front of it. And if it's a question for me, put a little J dash in front of it. Do not send questions to Orv or me because we don't see the chat box as presenters. If you have any kind of problems with your Zoom or questions in general, not about the presentations or maybe about APCUG, direct those to Bill James. Bill's one of our advisors, and so he can be able to answer just about any kind of question with Zoom or APCG. And so once again, Judy is the one you send questions to, and Judy has her hand up because she needs to say something.
So I was just going, but that's
yeah,
me.
Judy. Okay, what she is going to say too is to if you look at your name on your Zoom little camera picture and it isn't your name that you registered with for this workshop, you're not going to probably get any kind of follow-up material. So please right click on your picture and say rename and give us the matching name, because Zoom doesn't always match your registration name. If you don't want to change your name on screen, send your name to Judy so that she knows. Every week, every workshop, every VTC, the two of us talk about how many people are not getting any follow-up because we don't know who you are. So look at your name, and if that's not going to be one we can catch you, then we're not going to be able to do it. This week we're doing a Learning Linux. Next week we'll be doing a workshop on MeWe, which is a program alternative to Facebook. That will be a good one. We'll also be having a second part with Joe Dietz, right?
Joe Kissel from Take Control Books,
who is going to be repeating his security on internet stuff that some of the people didn't get into. So we'll do that. And then we're working on June. If you have any ideas for workshops, please submit those to Judy. If you would like to give a workshop, please submit that to Judy. Or if you want to be a part of a team, we have a lot of ideas coming up that we're going to need team members. And she and I, we're going crazy on, oh, let's do this. Now all we have to do is get somebody to do it. So if you have ideas or if you want to be a team, she'll let you know what we're thinking about. And then you'll be able to plug your names in. I think that's about it. So at this time, I'm going to take things over here and share some stuff with you. I'd like to welcome you. This is Orv Beach and John Kennedy with you today. Going to share a little presentation. The topics we're going to cover today between the two of us, tag teaming as on security, data backup, printing, little bit about talking about servers, and then we'll have our Q&A. But we're going to have a two-part Q&A. We'll have a Q&A with our normal questions about the presentation. And then today, Orv and I said, you know, we're going to open it up and any kind of other questions. I also have to tell you that future Linux workshops are in limbo right now. We've kind of run our brains as to what to do, and what we need today is in the chat box to Judy, we need some other ideas that are Linux related ideas. Not so much maybe software, because software is usually cross-platform and it crosses Windows, Mac, and Linux. So that's not exactly a Linux topic, but my idea would be that we've been doing this for 8 workshops now. And if Orv and I haven't convinced you to switch to Linux, I need to know why. What haven't we presented that has you ready to make the move? So during the workshop today, if you think of some topics that we can do, please submit that. I sent an email out to a couple of Linux people and said to them, hey, you've been attending this. What else do we need to present? And I got no response. So I'm assuming that we've done it all. And other reason with what Orv and I have talked about is that for us, Linux is just a tool that we use to do our computer work. It's almost to the point now where we don't even think about we're using Linux. We just start up our computers and we use our program managers to open up programs and we do things. But I'm sure there are still some things that people need to know, but maybe after today, we'll have it covered. So give us some questions on that. We're going to talk about security. Orv's going to talk about some background thoughts, and I'm going to give you some examples of software. And in data backup, which has been a big thing, Orv's going to share a little bit about what he does, and then I'm going to talk to you about lots of different backup software. A lot of people always have the question about, what about printing? We've heard stories that printers don't work with Linux. Well, that's not true. So we're going to talk to you about that and give you some ideas if you think you're having problems with printing. And then Orv's just going to share some talk and ideas about Linux and servers. Somebody had a question, but we're not quite sure exactly how to present this because it may not be something that everybody would be interested in. Then, as I said, we're going to be opening for Q&A on the presentation topics. And then anything maybe in general. We've decided that there are a lot of you who were not here from the beginning, and you might have some questions that we answered in the beginning. And so if we have time today, we'll talk about that. Orv and I are going to go back and forth between things. So here's our contact information, APCUG at www.apcug2.org. And if you need to get a contact with Orv or with me, there's our email addresses, and we'll bring that back up at a later time. So my slide says we're going to turn this over to Orv right now, and he's going to talk about why we feel that Linux is so secure and all that sort of stuff. So Orv, your turn.
All right. Let's see here. Let me launch this slideshow. You see that, John?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to talk about Linux security. Linux doesn't share DNA with Unix, but it has the same design philosophy. And you don't hear about big Unix servers being hacked anymore, although most of them have been replaced with Linux. Early on in Windows, pretty much everybody had automatic administrative access. That's much less the case now. Windows 10, Windows continues to improve in its security. That being said, you see all the security patches, almost monthly. Linux has a different philosophy. When you log in as an ordinary user. You have rights in your home directory, and that's it. You have to switch to admin access, which is known as root, and then do your maintenance work, program additions, deletions, patching, updates, whatever. And then you switch back out to your normal user. And in that way, a malicious program that you as a user run cannot do system-wide damage. The other thing is social engineering. Back in the day when you got an email with a supposed PDF or PNG in Windows and you'd click on it, if it ended in .exe and it was an executable, it would be off and running doing pretty much whatever it wanted to your system. A recipe for disaster. In Linux email attachments, any program actually isn't inherently executable. You have to set the executable flag on that program before the operating system will consent to running it. So if you got an email with a malicious attachment, to do any damage, you'd have to open the email, save the attachment, give it executable permissions, and then run it. And even then, if it was going to do damage like deleting files, it would run rampant in your home directory. But as soon as that program tried to get outside of your home directory, the operating system would kick it right out of memory. Not allowed. So inherently much more secure. I don't know if I agree with this too much anymore, but this was an old slide. Windows is written by Microsoft. There's no diversity, it's a monoculture. Whereas Linux has many different contributors, many different viewpoints, and when the code is developed, it is reviewed prior to it being accepted into the database of source code. Over the years, I remember 2 instances where someone tried to sneak malicious code into the Linux kernel, into the source code. And in both cases, it was stopped long before it got compiled in due to multiple layers of review. Another one, and yeah, Windows is a larger target, far more users. If you're talking Linux desktops, it's been hovering around 1% of desktop usage for decades. But if you're using an Android phone, it runs the Linux kernel. So there are far more Linux users in the world than Windows now, billions literally. And it's a more secure target too, due to the built-in security. There was a saying early on, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. It's called Linus's Law, but Eric S. Raymond said it first. He was kind of a Linux and open source philosopher in the early day. And that's mostly true. If you have a lot of people looking at the source code, they will find bugs. But a lot of these foundational programs that are buried deep down as utilities alongside the Linux kernel, it turns out they only have 2 or 3 people supporting them. So there aren't a lot of eyeballs. And in the recent, say last decade, they've found 2 nasty bugs that were in critical programs that were poorly maintained. So the Linux Foundation has adopted support for some of those foundational programs, the really critical utilities like SSH and SSL. And they will fund developers working on them or otherwise ensure there's enough resources. Additionally, over the last, 20 years, but steadily they're developing a much wider range of tools that are used to survey the source code for coding errors, poor coding design, typos, stuff like that that would that if compiled in would yield possible vulnerabilities. And by the way, those tools are being used not just for Linux, but Microsoft Windows, Mac OS. They're universal tools because a lot of these OSs are compiled from the same languages, C++, Rust, Go. There's a whole bunch of new programs, but they're these bug detection tools can work across all of them. And talking about bugs, when you see a release for something like Fedora, Linux, or Ubuntu, and you go back and look at what's been changed, and they'll flag it as either an enhancement, a bug fix, or a security issue. And typically, you'll see something like 80% enhancements, 15% bug fix, 5% security. But you have to remember, when they flag it as security, there's various levels of security issues. If you look in there, you'll find that, for instance, some security patch might be because some developer is deep in the bowels of some program, and he says, if I was sitting at the keyboard of this computer and I had this program installed and this program installed, and I submitted this particular string to this program, I could probably get root access. Well, that's a lot of things that need to come together, and you have to have physical access to the computer as opposed to a remote incursion. So even though it's flagged as security, the vast majority of them are not, what do they call, 0-day, out in the wild security issues that hackers can take care of, or have taken advantage of even prior to the developers discovering it. So when you say a security issue in Linux, there's all sorts of degrees of security issues, and that's true across all operating systems. Questions or comments? That was my quick and dirty one.
Yep. Orv, will you please expand on what the home directory is? We have a newbie here, and he says, what is it? Please explain. And what is in the home directory?
Okay. In Linux operating systems, every user is assigned a specific area in the home directory. Mine is home/Orv Beach. And a directory is a folder, and within it are kept everything that's pertinent to you as your account. Things like, your login profile, your preferences, and for any given program you install that's configurable, the things that you configure for yourself are kept in your home directory. And remember, Linux is a multi-user computer. People tend to forget that. My grandson could log in at this computer, and he'd have a completely different set of configuration parameters in his home directory depending on what he's run. People don't remember that Linux, it not only is multi-user, it's multiple simultaneous user. If you plugged an extra keyboard, mouse, and screen in here, you could have 2 simultaneous people using this Linux computer. So anyway, in the home directory, by default, are directories or subdirectories known as, documents, pictures, videos, all the stuff you'd expect. I'll talk later on when we talk about servers. I'll talk about why I don't use those very much. Did that answer your question, Judy? Are we good?
I think the other thing too is that it's very similar to when.
I guess so. Any other questions?
I would say it's very similar to when you go into Windows and you go into users, and then every person that has login has a folder with their documents and pictures, stuff like that. So it's very similar.
It is. People desktop computers tend to be one-to-one. Everyone has their own computer, so you forget that all of them can support multiple user logins.
Okay, we will move on. So we want to talk about, even though both Orv and myself and other Linux users talk about how secure things are, there are still software for security, and in particular, antivirus. And even though, as he said, to get a virus to run mostly on Linux, I have to do it intentionally. But if I have files that somebody gives me that I want to give to somebody else who could be a Windows user, I would be concerned about passing on something that doesn't hurt me but could hurt somebody else. So we have the software available. Two main ones that we have is called Clam AV and Clam TK. Now the little things that look like glasses, that reminds me, I'm going to show you a little bit about some of those. And these are programs that we would use for scanning our computer for viruses and such. There's also Linux versions from these three companies that are out there, the Sophos and Komodo, and even Avast has one. Most of the time, they are writing these for servers, because servers is what's all over the world. You know, you don't realize, some of you, how much you're using Linux servers for all of your internet stuff. So they write most of the protection programs for servers, but we can also use those on home computers too. So those are what we have. Now, in the Linux world, we always have two versions. We have the Orv version, or in my computer club, the Ken Bixler version, and we have other people's version, meaning we have command line programs that run, and we have GUI programs that run. So I'm going to show you that we have two different clams for whoever has their need. In the command line, I would run as a super user the clam program and scan, and I'm going to just do it quickly by saying I want to do my app. See if that works. And notice the security of a Linux is I can't do just anything I want to do on my own. Okay, that's not right. See if that one does it right. Give it a second to run. And what you do with the command line is you tell it exactly what you want to do. And I could have it just run my whole home directory, which would take a while, or run particular file or folders. Yeah, I'm doing that wrong. Oh, there we go. Couldn't access that. And then it gives you results of what you did. And even though that you can create something very massive, all you do is save that and make that what we call a script, change that to a little coding that you could just hit a couple of keys and run that. If we want to do it the GUI way, I can just find that. And the TK is for part of the GTK program developments. And so this will pop up. Somebody will say in the audience, boy, that looks like a boring, plain old program. It doesn't have fancy colors and whatever. Well, my answer to that is, what do you want? A program that works real well or fancy colors and stuff? And this is just the same kind of a virus program that the Windows people made, but very simple to run. You can see down at the bottom, I can scan a particular file or scan a directory, and I can update it. I can do automatic updates, and I can, whitelist things to say, don't think of this as a virus. I can schedule them. And so it's very easy. So I'm going to do a scan a directory, and I'm going to do my home directory, and there's my documents. And just like any antivirus program, we have it. Not that we use them, you know, some people, it's their preference. They can use them on a regular basis. Some people only when there's a real problem that is needed.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
You might mention that.
You might mention it.
Okay, I'll mention it. The vast majority of the things these antivirus programs are looking for are Windows viruses.
Yeah.
Typically you'd run them on a mail server, you know, scanning incoming mail attachments. I have been using Linux for longer than I care to admit, and I did run ClamAV on a mail server I ran for a while, but not on desktops. It's just good security and good common sense. You keep up with your patches on Linux. Make sure you don't give too much access to critical files, and just good administration.
Right. And I have to admit that I downloaded Clam and Clam TK just for this workshop, and whether I keep it or not, I haven't decided. But you can see it's reading through all of the files. I don't have very many on the laptop, so it should jump to the end, and it'll of course give you a report that no files were found. You can see so far they haven't found anything. So I'm going to go ahead and just cancel that. But that just shows you that there's available the stuff for Linux, just like at home. Close it out. There we go. Okay, so if we move on, the same thing goes that we have firewalls that we can do to protect Linux from outside activities, and the big one is the UFW, and then the G lets you know that this is a graphical one, and so there's a graphical one, and most of the time people just go ahead and just say standard settings, and then they just run it. And if we looked at, just to show you what it looks like. Oh, I don't want that. And again, I can't just do anything without root permission. So I can't even turn something on. And so this is all it is. And all I have to do is, you know, turn it on, and it already has standard settings that I just go with that, and it would be blocking. But I could go into all these things and set up rules if I knew what I was doing in terms of that detail. But again, they're firewalls. We've got them. Oh, yes, I want to. We also have software that you can run to check on if anybody's trying to hack or penetrate your network. We've got programs like Nmap, Windshark, and Snort. I'm not going to try to show any of those because basically they take a long time because they're always running, checking to see what's happening on your network. But I just wanted people to see that we do have those kinds of work. So that, you know, we have, I guess we have security when we feel we need the security. And you know, some people run their Clam AVs on a regular basis. And like I said, Orv and I don't, because we're very careful about attachments that come in. And I like it about the fact that nothing really runs on its own without my giving. And that's what we usually find out that in the Linux world, most of the time when something happens, there's a human error, not a Linux error, design error, but usually it's a human error that somebody, as Orv pointed out, didn't keep up with some updates or didn't fix a, patch something, and it's gone. But the nice thing about the security in Linux is things get corrected quickly. There was I think it was the Mint website got hacked. And so when people were trying to click on going to download one of the versions of Linux Mint, it took them to a bad site and they were given a corrupt version. That was found out very quickly. They shut down the main Mint website. The intrusion was discovered within a matter of hours and fixed, and not days. Because of the open sourceness, they had a whole team of people quickly scanned through that, found what the problem was, eliminated it, patched it, and it was back up and running in very short time. I think, Orv, what I was going to do now is have you just do that quick demo and talk about your backup with your, I think it's you using DD, because you said you just set it up and you forget it.
Yeah, it's RSync.
RSync, yeah.
I can do that real. I can do that real.
And I have a couple of questions.
Oh, okay.
I have a friend, not me, has
Sure.
repeatedly responded to spam messages to call this number. He's given the scammers permission to remotely log into his Windows machine. And my answer was, wow, you can't talk him out of doing this. But Kurt would like to know, would running a Linux distro like Zorin prevent this exploit?
Yes.
Thank you.
In a short word.
Can you use a VPN with Linux?
Yes, you can.
I do.
Is there an ARM-based Linux, and define what ARM is, since I have no clue?
ARM is the physical layout and architecture of the CPU chip that's run in Raspberry Pis and many other small single board computers. It's not an Intel type architecture. Programs have to be compiled for the CPU architecture they're going to be on. In other words, when you download Linux for Raspberry Pi, you'll get the same programs, but internally they're compiled for the CPU they're going to be running on. And what was the question?
Is there an ARM-based Linux?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Raspbian. Debian has been ported to Raspberry Pi. Fedora Linux has been ported. So especially with the Raspberry Pi 4, your selection of Linux distributions is growing steadily.
And when you talk about GUI, GUI stands for?
Graphical User Interface.
I have a lot more questions, but carry on.
Okay, Orv, because you're what you're going to share is the first bullet on our next slide when I get back to it. So go ahead. We're talking about backup because backup's been a big thing. We did a whole Wednesday workshop on backups, and mostly for like Windows. But I just keep wanting to say that Linux has it just the same, but always two different ways to do it.
Oh, more than. I just will say, even though I use a command line, I went and looked at a couple Linux backup programs. I'll let you talk about that, John.
Yeah. Okay.
But none of them met exactly my requirements, which is fine. So you can't do a backup on a system when you're running as yourself. You have to be the root user. A lot of people just do sudo, S-U-D-O, but I'm old school. I switched to root. Who am I? IR root. Good. Print working directory. I'm in the root directory. And you can see here, there's the files and directories, and you'll see the blue directory down there called scripts. And I only have two here. One's my offsite backup, and one's I back up some files from my daughter Valerie. Here's what I have in my house. We'll talk about servers later, but we have a household file server. It's called a NAS, a network attached storage, and we'll look at that later. Claim to fame, it has redundant disk drives. There's two drives in it that are mirrored. They're what's called RAID 1. Redundant array of inexpensive drives is what RAID stands for, and RAID 1 is just mirrored. So even though you have 6 terabytes of disk space in there, you only have 3 terabyte usable. That might not be enough if you were storing lots and lots of videos and movies, but we don't do that. So 3 terabytes is fine. So anyway, additionally, that NAS has a 1 terabyte USB drive plugged into it. And every night, the NAS takes all of the new files and copies them over to the external drive. So the NAS being mirrored can have a drive failure and keep running until I replace the drive. If something weird happened, we smoked both the drives, we still have the external drive. But if we had a fire and everything was destroyed, I'd be out of luck. Except up at my daughter's home in Valencia, Judy, she has another external drive of mine, and she periodically brings it down here. I plug it in and run my offsite backup. Let me do something real quick. This is a listing. It looks complicated, but all of the things with a green background are directories where we store stuff commonly. And all of those directories are not on this computer. They're on the file server. So I don't have multiple machines to back up, just the file server, which vastly simplifies your backup tasks. And those are the ones I want to back up. So my offsite backup, let me print it here. Really complicated, huh? Basically, Linux doesn't use drive letters. It uses other letters. The first line there, you can say mount/dev/sda1 on /mnt/temp. What that means is when I plug the external drive that my daughter has brought to me into my computer, it mounts it on SDA, and the partition is 1. So in other words, that's where the computer placed it. But that doesn't make the OS, doesn't make it visible to OS. You have to actually mount it someplace. And there's a common mount directory called MNT. Underneath it is a subdirectory called temp TMP. And normally MNT/TMP is empty. But when I mount the drive there, it populates it with all of the stuff that's on the drive, which is all the stuff that's been backed up. Then this script runs rsync on /audio/rstuff/bes, and it will recurse through those, every one of those directories and subdirectories underneath it, and will build up a list of files that have been changed or are new since the last backup. And if what it's found is newer that's on the backup drive, it will copy it over there. So it's not a full copy. It's what they call a differential copy. It only copies over things that are needed. And this is my security blanket. When it gets through rsyncing all of those, it unmounts the drive and it says, all done. Typically, since you're only rsyncing changed new drives, if she comes over here quarterly, even though it's running over a USB link, the rsync script takes between 5 and 10 minutes. So it's good to have. And I've only had to recover files that have somehow disappeared. Maybe I deleted them, but I found them on my external backup on the NAS, and it has a very nice GUI utility for retrieving stuff, and it worked just like it should have. John, that concludes my presentation on my command line backup, such as it is.
Well, that's perfect because that leads into what we're doing. But the other thing I was saying is that, you saw that he had a command that he would have to run that ends in SH, but he could create what's called an alias to a keyboard shortcut, and with just a couple of key strokes, it would run that script, and he didn't have to type the whole thing out. So yeah.
Oh,
so go ahead.
Let me put it back up there real quick, John. Show it real quick here. Okay, you can see the two scripts, and by the way, they're named .sh because they're shell scripts. They're scripts. They don't have to be named anything. File extensions, the letters that come after the dot, are not required in Linux. I could have just called it offsite_backup, or I could have called it FUBA, or whatever. This particular shell I'm running, bash, the one that I'm typing all the commands in, it very helpfully flags executable files in green. Up at the top, you can see the directories are flagged in blue, and there's some other stuff. But looking down at the bottom, if you look all the way off to the left on offsite backup, you'll see this cryptic line of letters. You'll see RWX, RX with a dash in the middle, and RX. So there's 3 letters, ignoring the dash in the front, and I'll talk about that later. There's 3 letters, 3 letters, 3 letters for, think UGO, user, group, and others. So in this directory, I actually own this offsite backup, but I have to run it as root. So it says read, write, and execute for the user, read and execute for the group, whatever group I'm in, and read and execute for others. I should take that out for good security. The dash in the front, if it's a D, it means it's a directory. If it's a dash, it means it's a file. And that concludes my overly complex presentation.
Okay.
And I have a couple of questions.
And I had one too that was sent to me. Go ahead, Judy.
First, can you use the R option to RSync if the directories you're accessing contain subdirectories?
Yes, the -A is a consolidation of a number of commonly used switches. That's what they're called, and it includes the R recurse function. So that's why you saw the -AV. V means verbose, but -A includes -R and some other useful things.
And how about the GUI version or RSync called GRSync?
We're coming up to the GUI stuff.
Sorry. Hold that question for next time.
Hold that. The other question that came up was that asking if you can set it up for automatic backups, and that's true. There's another program you can run in the command line and tell it to run this program at such and such time. So yeah, if you want to do it automatically, you can. But a lot of people, they just have a routine that they do it now and here and then. All right, so now, not to scare people off, but as you become a Linux user, you like to learn to do things that's going to be quicker, faster, and better. But a lot of people still stick with the GUI, the graphical user interface. And so along with RSync, which is very popular, a lot of people use it because it's so quick, there is a GUI program called Lucky Backup, and I'm going to show that to you as well. And there's another program called Deja Dupe. And with Linux, because because of the fact that it's open source and people can say, oh, I like this program, but I wish it had this, or I wish it was looked at this way or worked this way. So we have a whole bunch. And so the same thing, we've got an S backup, which is more of one that was built for the GNOME desktop. And then, of course, as you, hopefully you kept picking up, that in Orv's world, he uses KDE. So the version that was made for KDE is called K backup. You know, and so we got a lot of different versions. They all do the same thing, but somebody said, oh, this works better if we do it this way. And then I'm going to show you a program called Timeshift, which has another one very similar called Back in Time. So we have lots of different ones that can you can use with a graphical user interface without doing that. So let me make sure I'm going to do the right ones. Lucky, Deja, and then Time. And like I said, a lot of this stuff I have just, you know, downloaded for view today. And so now, what Lucky Bamboo, I'm sorry, that's a Chinese restaurant just up the street. What Lucky Backup does is it takes RSync and lets you easily build what Orv has done. And as you can see, you would set up and give it a name. So this is going to be, I'm going to off site, just like he said, and I'm going to back up. And I have two choices. I could either sync or back up. Now with the syncing, you got to be careful, because if you delete something on the backup drive, it's going to get deleted off of your drive. So I think most people go the safe way with the back. Then you just click the source and then the destination. Now, if I go into advanced, this is where you go into what do you want to not back up? What do you want to add extra? So you can build all of that, what he did, because in his, you know, he did the include where he told you which ones to include. And so you do that with it, then you would just add this to your list, and then you would have it running. Now, one thing nice about the Lucky Backup, I will say it again, and some other programs, is that you can do a dry run. And I've done that where I've been trying to build what a full RSync would be, and I run the dry run, and then it'll tell me that worked fine, or nope, you've got some option wrong. And so that's pretty nice to be able to do a dry run before you do the full run. So, you know, this is the exact same program that Orv did, only built by graphical. Oh, now I moved the wrong thing. If we go to Deja Dupe, which is, I'm sure what Judy wants to see, it in my version of my distro Linux is just called Backup. They didn't give it a fancy name, but if I go into the about, it lets you know that it's really Deja Dupe. And it does the same thing. You can tell, it said right here that I played with this 50 days ago and did a backup. And this is the program that also will let you restore all of your files. So Deja Dupe brings you back to the day. And so if I go into here, build it up just like you just say, what folders do you want? If I do home, it does everything. And there's a lot of hidden folders inside of home that aren't ones that you might necessarily need to back up. So sometimes it's better to go in farther and say, I specify, like Orv did, I want my documents, my pictures, my APCUG, or you know, whatever. And then you can say, don't do these. And you can see, I said, don't back up my trash. That's kind of silly. Don't back up any of my cloud stuff because it's already in the cloud. So build it, and then where are you going to do it? And you can see that I've got it set up for in the media folder into a folder. And then, as somebody said, scheduling. Now with this one, I can, and I'm going to get an error message. I'll let you know because of the way it's set up, because I don't have my thumb drive plugged in, but I can set up a backup and I can do it weekly, or I can do it daily. In the command line program and some others will give you more. You can say, I want to back it up on these specific days at this specific time. And each time I back up, it's a new backup. And do I want to keep them forever? Or I'll keep some backups for 6 months. So I'll have a series of backups. So that's how that one works. The other one is our Timeshift. And this is a lot like the, spell it right, Timeshift. As a, oh, look at that. Can't run that without permission. Oh, didn't type right. Typing too fast. And Timeshift is another one with a slightly different way of backing up. There's a couple of different versions of Timeshift with different names. The Mint has one that's a little bit different, but it's the same thing. You can see I've already done one to let you show that I've done one, but we're going to go to the one to settings. And notice right there, this is based on RSync. That is the backbone of backing up in Linux. I pick a location of where I want it to go. And right now, this is on a separate partition on my hard drive in a laptop. Wouldn't do that. I want to do it off. I can schedule. Now, this one is really, this is neat. As you can see, I have a lot of choices. I'm going to undo that one. I can do a hourly backup. I can do a backup every time I start up the machine. So I can do an hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. And so here's a sequence. When I was working as the building tech coordinator in my middle school, and we were backing up our files, we had the same sort of plan. We would do a daily backup for, actually, we did it for 4 days. And then on Fridays, we did a weekly backup. And I would do that for 3 weeks. And then on the 4th Friday, I would do a monthly backup. And well, let's just say we do it for 3 months so I can go back. This way, you can easily go back just 1 day to get to a file that you've lost, or 1 week, or 1 month. And so you would choose that. And so this is a very complex setup. But again, since we're using RSync, and there's another program in command that does the exact same thing, you just tell it how often do you want to back it up. And you can also then set it up for multiple users. As Orv said, this is, Linux is a multi-user computer, but right now there is just me. But if I had my wife on here, I could set up the backup to do her files as well. And then there's some filters that you can do to include, exclude, just like you do. So, this is the one that is a real nice one, a lot like the Time Machine in the Apple world. But we have it, and it works great, and especially because you can have the different days doing it. Now, this backup will usually back up everything on Monday, everything on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then you go back up. If you do the incremental one like Orv does, only the newest things get backed up. And so that is our backups that way. We also have system backups. We use a program called Clonezilla. It's a disk that you throw in, and because as he said, you don't really do your backups while you're running it, or you don't your restores. And there's a very good program called Bacula or baculum if it's the graphical user one. I have a program I'll show you in a second that comes with specially designed for this distro, but I'm sure that somebody's going to design it for somebody else because it's open source. So you've got all the code for it, called Snapshot. And it's very similar to Timeshift, only this one creates a bootable thumb drive that is my exact operating system with everything on it. And I did this in the beginning on my desktop, created my desktop, all the programs I wanted, all the settings I wanted, everything. Then I used Snapshot to back up the whole system to a thumb drive, put the thumb drive in my laptop, installed it, and then my laptop was identical to my desktop. So that's a great program because not only does it to restore your computer at a certain date, but you can also use it to install on another computer and have it identical. A couple things are mentioned on recovery. We have a program called Photo Rec. It's not like an accident, it's a photo recovery. Even though it says photo, it's a file recovery program. It's also named as in a program called Test Disk. They're kind of the same. This is a program for external drives. You plug it in for things that have been deleted. It goes through, finds all of those things that you accidentally deleted, brings them back up, and lets you recover them. A fantastic program. We've used it with people in our club who their thumb drives are empty. All the stuff is gone. Actually, they're not gone. They just don't show up. We put Photo Rec program onto that thumb drive, and after a while, because there was a lot on there, it brought back every file that was deleted. The only negative thing was it was a new generic name, so you had to go to each file and then rename it. But it recovered all kinds of files. And one thing that we have, and anybody can use, and it also works on Windows, there's a program called System Rescue, and it comes on a CD, and it does a lot of the recovery work that we would need. I'm gonna do the snapshot real quick, because this just amazed me when I was able to and I'm using MX Linux, and so it's a program that was designed for that. And it's going to be very similar. It's going to ask where are you going to save to, and then what are you going to save? It's going to save everything, and that's why I was able to recreate my desktop on my laptop. And it becomes an ISO, which is a bootable type of file that installs. We talked about those back when we were doing the virtual machines. And I'm not going to do it because it'll take some time and I don't have a thumb drive in there. But this is a kind of a backup that backs up, you know, everything. With one of the programs, you are able to do the backup and say, don't back up my files. Just do a system backup. Because as we try to tell people, you need to keep your home directory separate from your operating directory, either on a separate partition or on a separate hard drive. So then all I need to do is do a backup of my system, because my files are on a different partition, hard drive, and those are backed up. And you can make a special kind of recovery that just recovers your system, and then you just add back your files. Okay, now we're going to be switching to printing. We get a lot of bad rap because people tell stories about how bad printing is with Linux. Now, that might have been the case back when Orv says he won't admit how long he's been using Linux, but nowadays, it's not an issue. So Orv, you can go ahead and tell us about.
I have a
Oh.
question.
Okay.
This is a Judy question. Can any of those backup programs be used on Windows? I know a couple of them can be used with Mac, but what about those of us who use Windows?
Windows has their own backup programs.
So none of yours are compatible.
I can't say 100% for sure.
I just like the name Deja Vu.
Deja Dupe. Deja Dupe.
Yeah. Okay.
And it may be. I'll look that up and see.
And you answered all the rest of the questions.
Oh, good.
Should I go ahead, John?
Yes.
Okay. Every operating system has a place where you can adjust system settings. In KDE Plasma, it's called system settings. You can see all the stuff that's configurable for you on this system. Some of these are for your local account. Things that are system changes, it will challenge you for a root password or sudo password. It also keeps a list of things we've frequently used, and here that's kind of convenient. But about printers, it's pretty straightforward. Add printer, remove printer, system preferences. Got an HP OfficeJet 6970, which is currently turned off. This one particularly is over the internet, so you can't read the ink level, but that's not a big deal because the printer is sitting right in front of me. You can print a test page, you can configure it. If you want to add a printer, there's all sorts of ways you can connect to printer. In the old days, it was the bad old days, it was serial ports. Then there's internet printing, the old JetDirects, HTTPS, LPD and LPR, line print direct, line, I don't know, anyway, or Windows printer via Samba. There's all sorts of ways you could connect a printer. Typically, you'll do either internet printing, or most of them understand, let's see, which one is it? Pretty much, this one here. Hostname 9100, that's JetDirect. See, you just give it the IP address if you want. Because I don't have a printer turned on, there's no address to add. If you're not, let me put it this way. The Linux distributions, among other things, carry printer drivers, printer support files, config files for a vast number of brands and models now. Like John said, back in the old days, it was a pain to hook up a printer, regardless of which operating system you were working on. But Linux was especially annoying, and it's not that way anymore. If you're not sure if your printer is supported or not, you can go to openprinting.org/printers, pick the manufacturer. Let's say, come on. My browser's been giving me grief. Let me open another one. Here, we'll try linuxprinting.org/printers. Is that what I said? I think so. Did I say printers? Yeah. Oh, openprinting.org. My bad. But it found it anyway. Good, it's alias. So let's
let you know that it's not your bad. They redirect to the same place. There used to be the two different ones, and I was going to show if you weren't there today, and I'm going, wait a second, it keeps going to the same one, so they've merged.
John, my mouse is giving me grief. Do you want to show that?
I can, if after you say whatever else you wanted to say about it, printing and printers.
I was going to walk through that.
I can do that.
Yeah, let's do that. Let me
Okay,
shut this down.
I can be your I can be your screen.
I think this is the same issue I showed you with the presentation scrolling.
Yeah, see, I had both of these set up, and they both go to the same site now. So when you come to open printing, which has been around for a while, the Linux printing, they'll go to the same place, and it's basically you're going down to see the printer database. So go ahead.
I was going to say, pick a manufacturer, say Brother. They typically have not been real friendly to Linux.
Oh, surprise,
Just
surprise.
show all the printers.
What you
Okay.
notice at the top too, it says perfectly matched with 3 penguins.
Oh, scroll down. Let's see if we can see some that are not.
Mostly 2 penguins, partially 1 penguin, and my favorite, paperweights.
Yes. I'm happy to say that the percentage of printers that are listed at paperweights has grown steadily smaller over the years. And a lot of them are really, really old models that you probably couldn't even find on eBay anymore.
Yeah. I was looking at that because I have a Brother printer, and that was good. And what Orv also wanted to be able to show was this part, that if you go to the HP, this one's extensive.
Yeah. Early on, HP and Epson were very, very well supported in Linux. Since then, most of the other printer manufacturers have caught up to them.
Yeah. And this is kind of like the reason why, you know, people gave it a bad rap is the number. This is just HP, and look at how many different, you know, models of printers they have. And if they're slightly different, then you have to write a different driver for everything if they're not in the same family. And so that was part of a problem, is that there are so many of them, and the people who work for HP get paid to write things, but they may not want to take the time to write a Linux one, but now they're doing that because HP, and then the other one we said was Epson. And you can see that Epson has quite a lot of models that are compatible with Linux with no problem.
And by the way, at least with my HP, the scanner works perfectly under Linux too.
Yeah. We're still going.
Over the network. It doesn't have to be USB connected anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And Wi-Fi the same way too.
Right. I think fax works, but who uses fax anymore?
Yeah. And again, most of these are real older ones that become the ones that are the paperweight. So I think, or what would be your recommendation for somebody who was going to go to Linux and buy a new printer?
Oh, HP or Epson, you can't go wrong with them. Pick one with the features you want, and then just run through this list and just verify. Click on one of those that says only has 2 penguins and see what the comments are.
I'll get down there eventually. This is good. It takes so far. Okay, let's see. An Epson EPL 5700 series. Works okay. Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, this is your part. Yeah, works okay, but only in 300. 600 is mostly okay, but some glitches. So there, you know, part of it works, part of it doesn't work.
But this is a really old printer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you can do also on this page is that you can pick, let's say, well, I want to buy an Epson, and I want to buy, I'll just pick one right here, Artesian 1430 series. And before I go and put the money down, I can go here and see if they've got the driver for it and if there's any problems. And it doesn't look.
It's got
like
3
there's any.
penguins.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, thanks. Now, to go back to, Linux things in general that we've talked about over the many months, most of the time they have drivers for both 32-bit and 64-bit, even though 32-bit operating systems are way, way old. So you can see that there are 32-bit versions and 64-bit versions. Then when you look at it, we have to go one step more. The 2 most popular packaging programs would be the Debian, which is Debian, Ubuntu, Mint, and so on, everything that comes down that tree, and the Red Hat one, which is the RPM. So you would see that if I was going to get this printer, I would have to decide, do I want the RPM version or the Deb version?
Hey, John.
Yeah.
More than likely, your distribution would already have the appropriate drivers, either already pre-installed or I was going to make a comment. When I get a new HP printer, I do a search for anything that has HP in it in the repository. And a lot of times you'll find extra utilities or maintenance tools, and I just install them all.
Yeah.
And same thing with Epson or anything.
And what I've noticed in what I've done is that I like do a test with a distro with a live CD or something, or a thumb drive one. And I just start it up, and all of a sudden, bing, bing, my printers are already found and ready to go. I don't have to go in and do anything because so much of that is in the background. But if you should happen to have some problems, what you can do then is go, whoops, got to be a control click, is that you could go directly to the manufacturer. And so I have an Epson, and I can go and say, I've got there we go. I got a WF 2540. And there's my Epson Workforce 2540. And then I can go over to, downloads. Oops, I went one too many. And there's, all the, and notice, as a side, you can find drivers for your Chromebook. Go down here to Linux. And if it wasn't working right, I could come here and get my drivers. Now, Epson says we don't do it directly. We have a subcontractor that does it. So here are the Linux drivers. Now, these are definite Linux drivers for Epson. And I go to this site, and I've done this with mine, because the generic drivers didn't do everything. And it was a Workforce 2450.
2540, John.
Oh, thank you. I can always use my excuse that I can't see what I'm doing. And so here are the drivers. Now notice that you might say, oh, these are kind of old. Well, my printer's old. But these are the drivers that I need for my printer. And there's the driver I would need from my scanner down at the bottom. So I could just go ahead and download That's the main one, the newest one. And again, when you go to that one, you accept the agreement. And again, there's my two choices. Do I want a 32-bit or do I want a 64-bit? Do I want the RPM or do I want the Debian? And you can do that, you know, with yours. And I accept that and I would download it. Now, once in a while, I had a few years ago a Canon printer that I loved. It was, you know, it's a long time ago, and there were no drivers. The generic driver in Linux, because there's a generic driver, kind of worked, but it didn't let me do everything that I wanted. But I didn't want to get another printer. I liked this one real well. There is a website for a company overseas called TurboPrint, and it's been around for a good number of years. And what they do is they create drivers for some unique printers that might not be it. Now, I don't think they're as needed as they were back in my days, but we could go in here and I found the driver I needed for my Canon photo copier or photo printer one. And personally, it came with a better set of controls. You know, this is the control panel for that was even better than what came with Direct. Now, it wasn't free, so people said, what about that free, John? And I said, well, I wanted this printer. I didn't want to get another one. This one was a great printer. And so I bought one time only, because you only need the drivers once. And I was able to find the drivers for a printer that I couldn't find Linux drivers. They had it. And if you go to their website, and same thing before, supported printers, and let's say I do the Canon one. And so here are all of the printers that they have drivers for. And I think mine was one of the Pixma IPs from a long time ago. And so it cost me a little bit of money, but I was able to use the printer that I wanted. But to go back to you know, what Orv said in the beginning, that there's no issue with, you know, printing. Not unless you got a real unusual model of a printer. And for the most part, it's the typical plug and play. You add it on, it's found, and you use it. You might have to go in on my brother. I have to go in and change it. The default is not to do duplex both sides. I have to go in and turn that on because that's just not the default. But I would say that we don't have any problems with the printing. All right, let's see what's going on. I think it's, I guess that kind of ends it for our section on printing. Or if anything else you wanted to add on printing?
No, it's the worst part about printing is keeping it filled with ink.
Oh, yeah. And my worst part is that I got to do something. My Epson will not print black correctly. It leaves a little line every 3/4 of an inch or something, only in black. If I print in any other color, it's perfect, only in black. And I've put different ink in. And so I think it's the printer head, and it'll cost me more to try to fix that head than buy me a new printer that I always get on sale.
Yeah, printers are disposable. They make their money on the ink cartridges.
Oh, they do. They do. Okay, I think we're ready to go to our last section, which is, this is going to help me because I don't know enough about this. And Orv's just going to, whatever he wants to tell us about. He mentioned it earlier about the NAS and about servers and some stuff. I'm just going to let him take over and share with us whatever he wants to share about Linux and servers and such.
Okay, thank you. Here we are. Yeah. So a server is anything that provides a service. It could be a print server, a file server, a chat server. You know, at home when we talk about servers, you're usually talking about a file server, and you can have a separate device that's a file server, and you can use anything and set it up as a server. But the same caveat about preserving and protecting your files stands. If you have an old computer with a single old drive in it and use it as a file server, unless you're rigorous about your backups, you're just asking for trouble. And if you put yours and your wife's files on there, that's double trouble. So think real carefully about what you want to use for file server hardware. A lot of times, some little solution will work. Just make sure you have extra backups. I used to run my old file server, had a couple drives in it, and man, it was like having a kid that never grew up and moved out. It always needed some attention. So about, gosh, it's been about 5 years ago, I bought a commercial NAS, network attached storage. I bought mine from Synology, but there are a number of good vendors. And I bought a low end one. Like I said, it only has 2 drives in it. If you have 3 or more drives, you can run RAID 5. You get more storage that way. It's a little more redundant, but you know, that's okay. This one works fine. My only complaint about it is the GUI is a little leisurely, but I have it set up to do backups every night. And because it runs Linux, there's any number of programs you can set it up to run. Over and above the file server, I did run the video surveillance monitor on it for a while before I got a dedicated server for that. Here's the main menu. Here are all the things you could run. The photo station, video station, download station. iSCSI is a type of connection like USB for external drives. Where you manage, here's the control panel. You can add users, groups, and it's a GUI. It's much nicer. It really is nicer than for a server to have a GUI. Here's where you do my update and restore. So here, I only have one logical volume on it called volume 1, but all of those subdirectories that our workstations are attached to live here. When my wife saves something to her home directory, in there is a folder called Beth's. Well, she's not saving it onto her computer. She's saving it onto the file server up here in Beth's. And like I said, when she saves something, it saves on both drives. And at night, if it's new, it goes to the external drive. So it's all about backups. Now my package center is flagging me for something. Synology is very good about providing updates, not only for the operating system, which is Linux based. You can SSH into this thing and as admin do all sorts of stuff you would expect to do on a Linux computer. All packages. Let me just go to the installed ones. I don't have a lot installed because I just use it as a file server, but I do update periodically. Important updates for the operating system. It will notify you that you're pending, and if you don't do anything after a few days, it will install it itself and reboot overnight. So I could run updates on all of these, but I'm not going to do it now. Actually, I could do it, but who cares, you know? John, that's really about all I have to say. If you have more than one computer in your household that needs backup, I would consider seriously getting a household backup server. Mine's out in my workshop. That sounds flaky, but it's got air conditioning and it runs on an uninterruptible power supply. And I have a generator out back if I really need to keep it running. Over here, you can see out of that 3 terabytes, I've only used 14%. So in spite of having 35,000 photos on there, it's got lots of capacity. And it runs a health check. If one of the drives started failing, I'd get notified and I could order a replacement drive, get it here, and swap it out, and it would replicate from one to the other. I hope I never have to do that, but it's available if we need it. That's about all I have, John.
Okay. I tossed to you the question that, for me, the things I hear about servers, I hear file server, web server, mail server, and print server. And is that mostly businesses that would run those?
Yeah, I have a web server, but I don't run it at home. It's a cheapy virtual machine up in the cloud. I use it for a few specific things. And I meant to mention about print servers. Back in the old days, when printers were much more limited in capacity and used in companies, they couldn't queue up a lot of files to be printed. And back, 20 years ago, you did a lot of printing of reports and stuff. So they would direct everybody's printing output, their print jobs, to a computer that queued them up and would dole them out to the printer as the printer was available. And that was called a print server. Nowadays, printers have lots of capacity. We print a lot less, and everybody pretty much directly prints to the printer. So that's why you don't hear much about print servers anymore.
Okay. And printer's cheaper, so now almost you can have a printer beside your office desk, or at home you can have multiple. I have 2. I have a color printer and a black and white laser, so I can split the job there.
Where I used to work, they discouraged personal printers. They zoned them. It was like 10 or 15 steps away, and they're corporate type printers. They're networked, of course, very high capacity, very fast, and in my case, where we tended to some of the output had personal health information on it. You could tell it, don't print it until I put my PIN code in on the printer. So you could queue it up and at your leisure, walk over to the printer, put in your PIN code, and then and only then would it print your printout, so you could grab it and leave with it, and not leave it laying on the printer.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, Judy, Q&A time.
Thank you. Boom. We have 7 suggestions for workshops. So that's the first time in the whole free world that anybody has really answered our question. Can you use more than one security program with Linux?
If you did, I would say you'd run into problems just like you do with Windows.
Thank you. We all forget our passwords, and sometimes even where the sticky notes are that have them recorded. How does a Linux user recover his or her Linux password?
Well, if you lose your root password, you can recover it, but it's not straightforward. It does require booting the computer into a special single user mode, and it's well documented. If you use lose your regular login, you can log in as root and change any user's password.
And I would say, in fact, we have a piece of software called Trinity that we can throw into a Windows computer and delete passwords and change passwords except for the passwords that are in the cloud. And that's been a real help to use a Linux program for those people in Windows who can't remember their password. All we do is throw in the CD and it tells us the passwords or the users, delete their password, then they can go back in and create their new one again.
What size thumb drive are you talking about, John?
Oh, we can do Linux on something as small as 4 and 8. Probably 8's the smallest you can find nowadays because, you know, the size keeps going. But yeah, most of my thumb drives, you know, I've got Linux on, you know, 4 and 8.
And all Linux distributions run Snapshot?
I can't answer that one because right now Snapshot was written for MX because it says MX tools, but there is you know, you can probably do that thing. One of the questions that came to me was about a cloning program, and that's Clone Drive or CloneZilla I mentioned before. And so you can use that one to clone your drive, and then you convert it into a, you know, a file that can be installed, and then you can install it on another computer.
Serious? Somebody actually sent you a question?
They sent me a couple questions. That's okay.
I'm telling you, you guys, my preschoolers were much better at following instructions.
Yeah.
Orv, what distro are you using?
Over the years, I've switched most everything from Fedora Linux to Kubuntu with a K. But, you know, potato, potato.
Yeah, it's the KDE desktop on the Ubuntu base, and that's the thing with Linux. You know, you have two different choices. You either decide which desktop you like the best, and then you pick the distro, or you decide which distro you like the best, and then choose which distro or desktop they have that you like the best.
Hey, Judy, I didn't switch from Fedora to Kubuntu because I was dissatisfied with Fedora. It's an excellent distribution, but I started working a lot with Raspberry Pis, and their Raspbian is Debian based, and I was using it more and more. I thought, well, why not switch everything else over so I don't have to worry about where the dipstick is or which side of the car the gas filler is on. It's just to get more common base. The only Fedora machine left is my wife's workstation, and I'm gathering up courage to switch it over. I have to think about that.
Yeah.
And I don't imagine on one part of your presentation where you were talking about your daughter's information was at your house. And I didn't know she lived in Valencia, but I knew darn well she didn't live with you. So you were talking about, so everything is at Dad's house, so to speak. And then that again is at Valerie's house.
The external offsite backup server stays at her house, except when she comes to visit us. And while she's here, I run the backup and she takes it back away where an earthquake won't hurt it.
Yeah. You know, and we've talked before that the other option would be that some people could take a secondary backup drive, put it in your bank vault, give it to a friend that's close by, just to be able to have in that case.
Not too close.
Yeah, not too close, because, you know, neighbor across the street will probably have the same horrific weather event that you have.
Yeah, brush fire.
Yeah, and go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Orv and I really, you know, the majority of what we're worried about is fires, not.
Oh yeah.
Earthquakes don't happen that often, but
yeah.
I'm in the evac zone. I don't know about him, and it was an exciting year last year, and I'm looking forward to this year too.
Yeah, you know, and a comment on distro types, like with Orv, his reasoning with the Pi was very good. My reasoning for sticking with anything that's Debian is because I kind of learned the Bash and the Debian command line stuff, and if I would go to RPM or if I'd go to Arch, I've got to learn some new stuff. And I'm having enough trouble learning all of the ins and outs on the Debian side. So I pretty much stay with anything that's Debian. And before I was on Mint, right now I'm on MX. I'm thinking now of going back to more mainstream, either maybe to Ubuntu because of way Orv's influence, or the Cinnamon on Mint. So I haven't quite decided on, but it's still going to be in the Debian family.
Oh, gee, we have two more ideas. One is the ever popular command line.
Yeah.
How do you know if you're using Deb or RPM?
Go ahead, Orv.
The easy way on the command line is to see if the commands to support those are installed. There's a command called which, and if you say which apt or which RPM, it'll tell you where that program is located. If it comes back blank, you're not running it.
Yeah. And usually, you know, because you went to a specific distribution, and all the Ubuntus are based on Debian. So anything based on Debian, anything based on Ubuntu, anything based on Mint, it's just a big family tree. And then the same thing on the Red Hat side, you know, the Fedora, the Red Hat, the CentOS, changing.
OpenSUSE, those are
yeah.
really the only ones that are RPM based anymore.
Yeah, and then you go to the other one, which would be the Arch based. So you kind of know, but as you saw on there, that most of them, you know, the drivers and stuff came with, you know, programs Debian or RPM. And if you're a Debian family, you're safe to get any of those Debian programs.
Could one of you guys please show where you download your Linux stuff from? John Mazur showed us at one of the workshops. DistroWatch?
Mm-hmm.
Could one of you guys bring it up, John?
Kubuntu.org.
Yeah. I start with that, and since Orv's browser is kind of
right,
playing around, where's my... I go to the DistroWatch because that is kind of like your library, and there's another word where everything comes together. And when you go to their main home page, they have listed on the side their top 100, and there's even more than that of the Linux. And so if you come here, I advise people to understand that my MX Linux that I'm using is not the #1 Linux distribution. It's the #1 that people are looking at because it has a average of 3,356 hits per day. And that just means people coming to check it out. So, you know, you don't do that. Most likely the #1 is probably Ubuntu and the Ubuntu family, which is Ubuntu, Kubuntu, Xubuntu, Ubuntu Mate, all of that. That's probably the top one. But it doesn't list a top one because Ubuntu, each of their family is on a different website. Mint, on the other hand, has 3 versions, but they're all on the same website. So anybody that goes to check on the Cinnamon desktop, the Mate desktop, the XFCE desktop are all going to the same page, so they get the bigger hits. So I'm going to go ahead and let's just go down and find Kubuntu if I didn't pass it already. There's the Mate.
And for me, again, do you remember the name of the distro that he said I would like because it looks really like Windows?
There's 2 of them. I just found another one. Farron. No, it wasn't Farron. I found another one that looks just like it, but it's that Linux XF. There we go. There's Kubuntu. And notice it's 35th down the line, but that's because most people know about it and they don't go check it out. So if I go to Kubuntu's listing, this is where I get to see a nice little diagram of it. And it tells me it's a Debian Ubuntu base, the KDE Plasma desktop. Now, in some of them, they'll have multiple desktops because you go to one website and then you pick the different download for whichever desktop you want. And it shows that it could be a desktop, a server, it can run live. And then it gives you, I like the idea that they provide lots of reviews. And so you can go read somebody else's review. You can go and see gallery. You can go and see different, what Kubuntu looks like. And then it always gives you the forum and then the download. DistroWatch keeps them up here, but you can just go to kubuntu.org, like he said, and then you get it. It's trying to run. So I like using the distro, and so here again, you want the 64-bit. Oh, guess what? You can't have a 32-bit. So let's go back. If we go back to DistroWatch, and I apologize, you know, since if you haven't figured out, I've got an eye problem. If we go to the search, they also, because of this database, it's fantastic. Okay, you are still running a 32-bit. So we go down here and say, I'm still a 32-bit machine. And if I hit a submit query with just that, I will get a list of all of the Linuxes that have a 32-bit version, because a lot of them are dropping them, and I don't fault them. 32-bit is extremely old. We keep talking about in our Linux group at our ECOTUC, you know, they haven't built a 32-bit processing thing for a dozen or more years. But this is really nice because you can go in and I don't know if it, I'm just curious if they had a Windows one on here for a desktop interface. It would be called, where's the Windows? Oh, rat poison. But you can go through here and use their search feature and find everything that you wanted. Oh, here we did. We talked about the package manager. There's the Debian and there's the RPM. So if I wanted to be a RPM, and I'll take it off of that, I could say what distros RPM? Well, Fedora and OpenSUSE, just like he said. And here's an older one, Mageia, PC Linux OS, which is a nice one. So you can find that specific one. Or if we go Debian, we would have a big, longer list. And at the top of that one, just because don't believe this is the top one, but you can see that my Mint is a Debian, Mint, Linux, Mint, Pop! OS, Ubuntu, Debian itself, which could be, that's the granddaddy mother of all. So DistroWatch really gives you a lot of things that you can find, and then go to the website and download. Just don't get caught in thinking that this is the best one, because they keep saying it's the page hit ranking. And because a lot of people are checking out, they hear about MX Linux, and it's a really nice one. And so people go and look at it and they find it's out there. But if you go down to the bottom, oh, there's an Ubuntu DP. I was trying to find her Fahrenheit checked on. But anyway, so I think that's the the best that way to go and find.
You see how these Linux people are. It's our workshop and John's going, oh, I found something new. Too cool. Okay, I tried to install VM on Mint, but got stuck. Could somebody show the procedure, or have you done this at another workshop that you can let me know so I can let them know?
Well, we talked about doing it, but it depends on which program you're using, because there are two main programs. VirtualBox is the one that most of us use, but there is another one that makes it. And now GNOME has their own version called GNOME Boxes. So it would have to go, well, what one are you using? We can do a workshop on it because it works. Judy?
So what you're talking about, you guys, as opposed to us guys, use Oracle's VirtualBox?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
We will do a workshop on that.
Yeah.
Because it's in here a couple, 3 times.
John, we can.
Go ahead, Orv.
This is for,
Hold on a second. Orv, go ahead.
I was just going to say, VirtualBox works very well, but it is not open source. Linux
Right.
itself has KVM, which is
Yeah.
built-in open source, and it's gotten quite good too. So we can look at that too.
Good idea.
there's 2 to show right there, because my guy, Melton says that he likes the VirtualBox because it's the easiest one and it's free. You could call him Free Dave, okay?
Yeah.
When you discuss printers, you talked about, this person saw PPD on one of the sites you visited. Can you talk about what PostScript printer definition files are?
Not me.
I don't know. Do you like to edit HTML and XML by hand? A PPD file basically tells the driver the characteristics of that specific model of printer. If it'll do duplex, if it'll do color, how many feed trays it has. Generally, the PPD file will come when you when you configure. Let me rewind. For HP, for instance, not only is the driver supplied, but the PPD files are supplied in the distro for the most popular 100 or so printers. Pick a number. I've never had, it's been about a dozen years since I've had to go look for a specific PPD file for a printer.
Yeah, that's, to me, I don't remember for years worrying about PostScript printing and stuff.
Also, wipe that from your memory. This dates back to your Gramps presentation, or Ancestry on Windows requires an annual subscription. I think the question is, do you have to pay for Gramps? Gramps is free. Open source and free.
That's correct. It's open source and free.
And I have comments. I have a few more questions here, but some of them are convoluted. So let's open it up to live Q&A. And thank you so much.
Ready.
And David Cunningham, I appreciate the laugh. Thank you so much.
I'm getting them ready. Allow.
And don't forget, you're going to use the reactions button on your toolbar and raise your hand, and you will pop up to the upper left-hand corner that I dearly love, because that's reading readiness, left to right.
Or top to bottom in the
Oh,
participant
I
list.
have another quick question. Can you use, does LibreOffice have voice recognition, like you can dictate to it and all that good kind of stuff like you can with Word?
Oh
I don't know.
my. Yeah.
Anybody know?
I think that depends on something else. It's for example, if you're on a Mac, for sure you can dictate to LibreOffice on a Mac with Siri, but I don't know about Linux because I haven't tried doing it.
Well, if I get my comparison of Word and Docs and LibreOffice, we will find out about that.
My comment would be, I have enough trouble with my fingers typing what I want to say rather than my mouth trying to say it.
Oh, true. Hey, question from Murray. Unmute yourself, and you did.
Okay, so I'll lower my hand then. Yeah, okay. I was going to ask is from Snapshot. Of course, I know it right now it isn't available on anything but MX Linux as far as I could find. But in MX Linux, can you use it to produce a DVD ISO as well as or instead of a thumb drive?
I think you can, but the attitude is, who uses disk drives anymore? And,
I do.
Yeah. And it does, because there is a program, in MX and other in Linuxes that, write to thumb drives by default. But I would think that you could, if you just save it as an ISO, then you can use your burning tool that you have in Linux and burn it to a disk.
Okay, thank you.
Question from oops. Go ahead, Murray, if you've got another question.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to say I did write this question in the line, and maybe it's really more command line. I actually use DDFLCD, I think it's called, version of DD. It's more verbose, but I used it a lot for doing copying one partition to another partition. I sort of use it like clone for backups, but and I would just, for some reason, this morning when I did it, gave me an error. Maybe I'll have to send an email to one of you guys about that one. But I also wanted to just mention that when you're talking about ClamAV, I have used that when people have had really corrupt Windows computers, like their kids have played so many games and downloaded so many games that were full of viruses. And the standard, at least free antivirus Windows programs didn't really get them. I basically used a live DVD, a Linux live DVD with ClamAV, and got rid of all those viruses on PCs. So it can be used that way to clean up PCs as well.
Thanks, John, for the link. And everybody that made a comment, those comments will all appear in the Q&A list that I send out. Carl has a question.
What was the name of the Ancestry
Gramps.
program there was a free program?
Gramps, like Grandpa, Gramps.
Oh, thank you.
Or
Any
specialty.
other live questions? As compared to dead questions?
Yeah, I'd also like to just to toss out, when we were talking about the security and the backup programs, that a lot of the window programs that you Windows people are using, when you throw in the CD for like Aomi or ASUS and stuff, a lot of that is actually a Linux program on that disk, because that's can be booted up from live. Windows you can't boot live. So, these people are using a Linux program to boot your computer and to back up your files and recover your files. So you're using Linux.
Well, you're using it a lot of places in the world that people don't understand, but I love it. You guys, I mean, we're we guys Windows, we're we guys Mac, we're we guys Linux people. APC tries to put it all together.
We're all technology. Yep. We're technology.
Anyway, no more live questions. I am shocked.
Any questions from past stuff? This would be a time to ask something that wasn't part of our presentation, because who knows, this may be the last one, unless Judy got some really good ones that we can do.
Oh, I do. But
Okay.
but I do have that. We're using the reactions button and raise your hand. Thank you so much. Oh, John has a question.
Yeah, I'm interested in a workshop on how to install a headless NAS system.
Ooh.
Hopefully that's in the chat box.
How's that?
Oh,
Headless?
John.
Headless.
Get real. And I do have to say, we have some very knowledgeable comments in the chat box. There are people among us who could be at a Linux presentation as a team member.
Yeah.
John Carter, Joe Bruno, and you make presentations to PCS all the time, John. So
Yeah. I told Judy that when she put it in the announcement that went out in the email that Orv and I were enthusiasts was a good term, because that way I can say I'm not an expert and I just a guy who likes it. So I can get away with saying anything that's not right because I'm not an expert. I just love it.
enthusiast, and Huey Poplock is the Chromebook enthusiast. I give you guys all your very own titles because you are so enthusiastic. Bob about Avast and security, Huey about Chromebooks for older people. Hey, Harmon has a question. Thank you.
Yes, with Komodo, I've tried multiple times to install that. It'll only install in 32-bit. 64-bit has never, ever installed correctly.
Since I don't use it, I just looked up and found that they had those out there. So I can't answer what the problem would be, especially that it only work on 32 if they have a 64-bit.
Well, they offer the 64-bit, and when you attempt to install, the dependencies are not met.
What distro are you using?
Well, right now I'm using MX Linux 19.3. I've tried it in multiple Ubuntu distros, and it never makes it in 64-bit.
Interesting.
Are you sure that you have a 64-bit computer?
I knew you were going to ask me that. It's possible that some of the older computers that I have Linux on them might not be 64-bit, but I'm not sure what it is that makes it 64-bit to start with.
Well, it's the computer chip that's inside it, what they call CPU or central processing unit, and that is what determines the architecture. And if you've got a 32-bit architecture, and if you've got depending what the operating system is, you can find out what your CPU is and look it up and see what is 32 or 64-bit. If it's 32-bit, you'll never get a 64-bit distro to install.
Okay.
And where can we look to find out if it's 32 or 64-bit?
Well, it depends what operating system.
Windows. Is that an about?
Yep. Go
Harmon.
to your settings, and then in the Linux, we just go to the command line and say just a couple of words, and it'll tell you everything. You know, on my terminal, I've got a new program that's added on it that every time I start the terminal, it tells me all that information right there. Yeah. Something else I was going to make a comment about. Oh, on the 32 64-bit, there's also a trick. I have an older laptop that I've had for many years. Actually, it was 2008, so whatever, 13 years. It's still running, not great, but it's still running because I'm using a light version of MX, but it's still running. But the point I'm getting to, it's a 64-bit, it says, but it turns out that the processor isn't a 100% 64-bit. There's something about the dual core back 2008. So when I run VirtualBox, I can run the 64-bit VirtualBox program, but I can only run 32-bit operating systems because it can't do a 64-bit virtual machine, even though I can do a 64-bit that. So on that old laptop, all I can have running virtually is 32-bit machines because it was an odd processor back then. So even though you have a 64-bit, you might not be able to run some 64-bit stuff.
John, question.
The question about what kind of operating system do you have? If you just open up the system prompt and type in about, it works for both Ubuntu and Debian. It'll tell you what your operating system is, what your core, what your hardware is. And I believe the same thing works for Windows. So I'm going to try that right now. Yes, it does. Just type in about. That's all you need.
But it doesn't do that on my MX. About
well,
comes up as a
fine.
command not found.
Yeah.
But like I
You
said,
can also,
go
You
ahead.
might
Also
say
open the
system
command
or, info, system, about, any of those types of commands. But
You can
about
type
works
ls.
for Debian, works for Ubuntu, and it works for Windows.
the command line that'll tell you all about the CPU that's in there is ls CPU. And it'll give you
Not
the
in
operation.
terminal, not in terminal. I don't do that in terminal. I just,
Oh, okay. That's why it doesn't work.
yeah.
All right, you're talking old school. So you're talking about
Yeah.
going into
Yeah.
the your menu and doing a search.
Right, yeah, just, on my Windows key, I just hit the Windows key and then type in about.
Interesting. When I do it about in mine, it comes up with the user information about me. So a lot of that is, when you're using the programs in your computer, they're all pretty much, dependent upon what the
Right.
top unit built. Because like I said, Deja Dupe, for me, it's called backups. 'Cause it's easier to remember backups than Deja Dupe.
Well, in Debian, when I type in about, I get two options, about me and settings. When I click on settings, then I get the configuration.
Yeah. So when I type, just to show, when I type about, I get about me, LibreOffice, preferred applications, but I don't get the about.
How about settings? What do you get when you type in settings?
That'll go to all my different settings program. But probably if I go to system, might do it. But I never do it that way because I just do it through the command line, which is easier.
Okay.
But that's the teaching. Bill James has his hand up.
I just had a comment in Windows 10. If you type in about in the search box, it comes up with the information on your PC.
Right.
Good.
I have something from David Cunningham that will be in the chat that I'm not going to read because you guys, some of them when you go, but that's kind of an answer about 64-bit. Over to Murray with a question.
Okay, it was really a comment. I did put it in the chat area, so it'll go to everybody. But you mentioned about a program if you're having trouble with your drivers for your printers. I had the problem of with one of the Epson scanners when I upgraded from, I don't know, Windows XP to Windows Vista or some fool thing. And Epson is bad for this on their scanners. When it goes to a new operating system, they don't supply drivers for the new operating system for their old scanners. But there's a company, Hamrick Software, that makes a really fantastic program called ViewScan. And there's a free version which you can use, which is okay. I chose to get the paid version. I think I paid something like $20 10 years ago, and I get the updates every. I still keep getting the upgrades, and I can use it on all of my computers, Linux, Windows, and Mac, and that works beautifully. I tend to use it more often than the actual Epson scanner software.
Good.
Just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, it's good.
Any more raise your hand questions?
I don't know if Bill has a new hand or just didn't go down.
No, it's a new hand.
Okay, Bill.
I was just going to say, I know this is Linux, but if you're a Windows user and you get a pop-up that says your drivers are out of date, click here to update. Please do not do that.
Oh, no, really? Oh,
No, under no circumstances.
but I want up-to-date drivers.
But you don't want them from that party.
No, that's the wrong friend.
Yeah.
Ira, unmute yourself, please.
Oh, okay, I'm here.
Yes, you are.
Question for John or anybody. John,
Yo,
on that D package manager, you know, the package manager I've been trying to get, the graphical one. I have, and I checked it and I said, well, maybe I'll have it because everything's set up. I still don't have that package manager where I can go and see or depackage.
it's not going to be, it's not a graphical one. It's just going to be a command line in the background stuff.
Oh, that's all it's going to be. How
Yeah.
come it used to be on my other machine? It is a graphical one for my package manager. I can go in there in my package manager and I can do things with it graphically.
You know, you're not talking about the software program to be able to see all the programs you want to download and
Yeah,
uninstall.
I typed that into the in the search box. And
Yeah, because it's not a program that will be downloaded through the repository. It's a command line program that you get by just downloading it through the command line and then you use it. Yeah,
we tried that, John.
Well, it's just a program that you know, installs programs and packages. It's not one that you run separately.
What distro is he using?
Ubuntu.
Well, then he could be using, well, I think it's called, then it depends on which desktop. For example, under KDE, it's Discover, but you can always add Synaptic, and that'll help him find it. But
it was a matter of he was trying to do a program that was not in their software management because it was a newer version than what Ubuntu had, and so he needed to use the GDebi program to install it instead of letting the Ubuntu software do it. And there was a depackage problem, but that's just a utility that runs with the command line.
Okay.
Question from Gerald.
My question is, if I'm running Mint, how do I upgrade the kernel?
Oh, any new kernel will appear in the periodic upgrades. You just run your standard upgrade all the software and the new kernel will be pulled in. However, in order to start using that new kernel, you have to reboot the system.
Okay, so if I'm in Synaptic, I run the
You wouldn't use Synaptic to get your kernel.
No, update.
Yeah, you do the update program, but you also have to check to make sure that you can, in some distros, select only long-term kernels and not every new one, just like the Ubuntu comes out every 6 months, or you can do it the long term, which comes out every 2 years and lasts 5 years. But a lot of people, they want to stick with a long-term kernel and not keep going with the newest one that comes out because it can cause some problems. So your Mint might be set to only use the long-term kernel, so it won't update for a while.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Like those pesky Tuesday patches sometimes. Over to you, Harmon.
Yeah, Ubuntu Mate.
Yes.
You have to use the boutique software has the Synaptic package manager, but you have to install it through the boutique. Okay.
Yep. The boutique is a special package of here's the most popular, but you could download Synaptic on your own. You don't have to get it through that. You can go to the command line and download Synaptic that way and then use that to do it. But boutique is really nice because they've said here are the most popular ones right graphically that you can pick, and then they also let you download Synaptic if you want to go into more detail on that way. But yeah, you can get it that way, or you can just go to your command line and sudo install Synaptic.
I just wanted to clarify that the kernel updates, kernel updates come automatically, and but it's the distro updates that you have to do the things about the long-term support. But very often during a particular cycle, for example, in Ubuntu, you'll often get an updated kernel between those major updates. I know I've often seen a new kernel come out. That's different than the distro.
Yeah, but I think in Mint you can go into your update manager and say only install long-term kernels.
Oh, you can do. Oh, I see. Yeah, I know you can do that in Ubuntu. You can say only install long-term distros or upgrade. Yeah,
Right.
But the kernels get updated all the time.
Yeah. Well, see, some people didn't like that, so Mint said, okay, we'll give you the option that says only long-term supported.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Which then eliminates some little Tuesday hassles.
I got a question.
Yeah, Ira.
Yes, John, the difference between firmware update and a kernel update.
Firmware.
Yeah,
Orv?
I had a firmware update on my computer the other day. That's before we got everything straightened out. And it didn't do it because it said it was error, you know that. But it's never come up since that's been fixed. And I was wondering what happened to that firmware update, although Ken and I updated about 3 times in there. So it might have did it automatically when I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
But what's the difference between a firmware and a kernel?
Orv, did you want to start that?
Yeah, firmware is a kind of a memory chip that's non-volatile. In other words, it's like a ROM or an EEPROM. It sits on the motherboard. When you power up your computer, it automatically goes to the firmware and starts executing the BIOS or the EFI. And it's a software package that's not soft. It's firm. It stays there. And they do issue periodic updates. Only recently, in the last year or two, have the hardware vendors started giving firmware updates to Linux, who now are able to provide them in the repository. I have a Dell that says it has an outstanding firmware upgrade, and I've not figured out yet how to apply it. So kind of a work in progress, but at least they're getting the updates now.
The only update like that I've ever had besides this, and that's the first time I've ever seen it on Linux, was my router.
Mm-hmm.
I had firmware updates for my router, but
Right.
never on the Linux. Never on the Linux. That's the first time I ever saw
Now they're providing them.
it. Okay.
I don't know how reliable the update process is yet. Remains to be seen.
That's
Orv,
good.
is that the Dell update that is been around for eons and is bad news for Dell users?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I saw update packages over the last 90 days or so being updated, and it's not just for Dell. It's everything.
I've had 2 recently with this Dell that is the world's worst computer. I've had it a year, but the 2 have come within, a couple of months of each other. And before that, I didn't get anything.
Okay.
Any more questions? Going. Over to you, John, to close us down.
Okay. I appreciate everybody who attended today and has been attending our Linux. As I keep saying, Judy got me to try this and I said, I just don't know. And after 8 workshops, and looks like we may be back for another 1 or 2. Thank you for coming. We will be back next week with our combination of MeWe, and I think everybody want that, and our security one. Judy?
I only have 2 people that aren't, as of right now, that aren't going to be getting the follow-up material. And that is plain David with no last name, because we have several Davids registered. And the wonderful, popular person who is named iPhone.
Yep.
iPhone.
iPhone. Yep. I'm sure kids are being named that as we speak.
Yeah. So if you have ideas, okay. Also let you know that in 3 months, August, we will have our next VTC already being filled up with presentations. And otherwise, thanks so much. We'll see you, and hopefully we'll be back with another full month of, or at least 3 out of 4 weeks next month. Have a good day.